All right, let's dive in. We're going deep on the core ideas of applied behavior analysis, ABA, and we're using behavior analysis for lasting change to help us along the way.
It's going to be a fun one.
So whether, this is all brand new to you or you just want a little refresher, we're going to make these concepts really clear and easy to use.
Absolutely. And we'll show you why they matter, like how they really help you understand how behavior works.
Okay, so first up, something that sounds really interesting. The book makes this clear difference between learning and teaching.
Yeah.
I feel like we often use those words as if they mean the same thing.
Right.
But in ABA, they have these really specific meanings, right?
Yeah, they do.
It's kind of like, the difference between just watching something happen, naturally, and then actually setting things up so that something will happen.
You're exactly right. So in ABA, learning means any lasting change in behavior that happens because of an experience. So it could be like a kid learning to stay away from like a rose bush after getting poked by the thorns. So that's, learning from experience directly without any kind of structured teaching.
So then in that context, what does teaching actually mean?
Well, teaching in ABA, that's all about purposely creating an environment to help learning happen.
Okay.
So think about a music teacher helping a student practice scales.
Yeah.
The teacher gives instructions, feedback, and they make sure there are times to practice. And that leads to the student learning these specific skills.
Yeah. So even though the kid might eventually figure out those scales,
right,
the teacher's really making that learning happen so much faster.
Exactly. The kid's learning in both cases, but with teaching, you're being intentional. You're adding that structure, and it really shows how powerful teaching can be when you want to change behavior.
That totally makes sense.
Sure.
That reminds me of something in the book about the three-term contingency.
Oh, yeah.
Which sounds a little complicated at first,
okay,
but it's really about understanding the why behind a behavior.
Yeah, definitely. The three-term contingency, we call it the ABCs of behavior sometimes.
Okay.
And it's like a core concept in ABA. It's really just a simple but really effective way to analyze behavior. And it works by, breaking it down into its parts: antecedent, behavior, and consequence.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit more. I'm looking at figure 2.1 here, and it shows all these different ways a preschooler might ask for help. Like shouting, holding up a tool, saying, "I can't do it." But they all lead to the same outcome, right? Getting help.
Yeah, that's a really good example of how one function, like getting help in this case, can show up in all sorts of different behaviors.
Right.
And the three-term contingency, it helps us see the context of these behaviors. There's this example of Mr. Brennan asking his student, Mark, to do his spelling exercises. So that instruction, that's the antecedent, right? What happens right before the behavior.
So the antecedent kind of sets the stage for the behavior.
Right. And then you have the behavior itself.
Okay.
Mark doing his exercises.
Right.
And finally, we have the consequence. Mr. Brennan, he smiles, and praises Mark for trying hard.
Yeah.
And this consequence, that's what decides whether Mark will do those exercises again in the future.
So the three-term contingency helps us see how that antecedent kind of triggers the behavior, and then the consequence either makes that behavior stronger or weaker over time.
Exactly. And get this, understanding this whole sequence is super important for anyone who practices ABA, right?
Yeah.
Because it lets them figure out what's driving a behavior, and then they can plan ways to change it. You have to look at the whole picture.
Yeah. So it's not just about changing the behavior itself. It's about understanding the whole context.
Right.
The why behind the what.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the book also talks about respondent behavior and operant behavior. And I got to ask, what's the difference between those two?
Okay, so think of it like this. Responding behavior is like a reflex. Like when a doctor taps your knee and your leg jerks, it's automatic, like a response to something specific. We also call it classical conditioning. Operant behavior, on the other hand, is voluntary.
Okay.
And it's influenced by the consequences. So raising your hand in class to answer a question, that's a choice you make based on what might happen afterward.
Like getting praised by the teacher.
Yeah, exactly.
So respondent behavior is triggered by something that comes before it, while operant behavior is shaped by what happens after.
Exactly. And there are some pretty cool examples in the book to, show this. Remember Pavlov's dogs?
Oh, yeah.
They salivate when they hear the bell because they've learned to connect it with food.
Right.
That's respondent conditioning.
Okay. And then there's the example of someone disliking spinach after getting sick.
Yeah.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, another classic case of respondent conditioning.
Right.
An unfortunate pairing leading to, a conditioned response. And for operant conditioning, think of things like taking out the trash to avoid being nagged.
Hmm.
The consequence, avoiding the nagging, that's what makes you take out the trash again.
Right. So both respondent and operant behaviors, they like play a role in our everyday lives. But how can we actually use this knowledge to, encourage positive changes in behavior? The book spends a lot of time on this idea of reinforcement, and I'm really curious to hear more about it. It's more than just giving rewards, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. It's about making a behavior stronger, like
Hmm.
more likely to happen again.
Right.
And there are two main types, positive and negative, but, and this is important, these terms don't actually mean good and bad like they do in, regular conversation.
Right.
It's all about adding something to the environment or taking something away.
Right. That's where it gets a little tricky. So positive reinforcement would be adding something good to increase a behavior.
Right. Yeah, like giving a kid a sticker for finishing their homework.
Okay.
And then negative reinforcement is about taking away something unpleasant,
Hmm.
also to increase a behavior. So think about buckling your seatbelt to make that annoying beeping in your car stop.
Yeah.
You're taking away that annoying sound, and that makes you more likely to buckle up next time.
So both positive and negative reinforcement, they're aiming to make a behavior happen more,
Mm-hmm.
but they do it in different ways.
Exactly. And it's really important to know which type of reinforcement is happening if you want to change behavior effectively. It all comes back to understanding why the behavior is happening and what's keeping it going.
This is seriously making me think about, like, everyday interactions in a totally new way. It's like we're decoding the language of behavior or something.
Yeah.
But I'm also wondering, like, how much control do we actually have over our behavior, considering how much our environment can influence us?
That's a good question.
Is that what the book is talking about with stimulus control?
You're totally on the right track. Stimulus control is about how, cues in our surroundings can affect our actions.
Right.
It's like how the smell of fresh cookies might make you want to go to the kitchen, even if you weren't even thinking about cookies before.
That's so true.
Right.
So certain things, certain stimuli, they're like signals telling us to behave in specific ways.
Exactly. And the book outlines 3 types of stimulus control,
Okay.
each with its own way of shaping our actions. The first one is discriminative stimuli, which we shorten to SDs.
Okay.
These cues signal that a certain behavior might get reinforced.
So an SD is kind of like a green light,
Yeah.
right? Telling us, hey, this behavior will probably lead to something good.
Exactly. Like seeing the open sign at your favorite coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
It's a signal that going inside, well, that'll get you your coffee.
Right.
Without that sign, you wouldn't know if going inside would work.
It's like the environment is dropping hints about what actions will work in that moment.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. What about the other types of stimuli?
Well, there's also what we call stimuli associated with reinforcement, or SRs. So these are cues that, they've been connected with reinforcement before. So now they can make the behavior happen even without the original reinforcement. Think about hearing the ice cream truck music.
Oh, yeah.
It might make you crave ice cream, even if you don't instantly think, oh, got to get me some ice cream. It'll be delicious.
That makes sense.
Right?
It's like our brains have linked certain cues to good feelings or experiences we've had before.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the flip side, stimuli associated with punishment, SPS. They basically signal that a behavior might be punished. Remember the example with Mr. Dyers and Dagwood?
Oh, yeah. Poor Dagwood.
He quickly learned not to look up from his computer.
Right.
Because every time he did, his boss would just, let loose with a verbal attack.
Right. So for Dagwood, seeing Mr. Dyers coming was like a warning sign that something bad might happen.
Exactly. It's a pretty extreme example, but it shows how we learn to avoid certain things to prevent those negative consequences, right?
Right.
And it really makes you think about all the little things in our environment that might be changing our behavior without us even noticing.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly navigating this like hidden web of stimuli that's influencing our behavior. But do we always react to these stimuli in the same way?
Yeah.
Or does it change depending on other things? This brings me to the last thing I wanted to talk about today. Motivating operations, or MOs. What are those all about?
They're fascinating. Think of them like a volume control for how much we want something and how well a reinforcer or punisher will work at any given time.
So it's not just about liking or disliking something. It's about how much we value it right then and there.
Right.
Like, I might absolutely love pizza,
Mm-hmm.
but if I've just had a huge meal, pizza just doesn't sound good anymore.
Exactly. Being full has made pizza less rewarding in that moment. And the book uses this great analogy with ice cream.
Okay, I'm always down for an ice cream analogy.
So you're way more likely to want ice cream on a super hot day, right?
Right.
That's deprivation, making it more reinforcing.
Yeah.
But if you've just eaten a whole pint, well, another scoop wouldn't be too tempting. That's satiation in action.
So motivating operations are always changing,
Yeah.
and that affects how we react to the world around us.
Exactly. And if you understand these changes, well, that can be really helpful for predicting behavior and making those interventions work.
Wow. All of this is making me look at my own behavior and the behavior of others in a whole new light.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
but I feel like we're really just getting started.
We are. There's so much more to uncover.
So we've been uncovering some really interesting stuff about how reinforcement can shape behavior, how those motivating operations can make a difference, and how stimulus control plays a role.
Right.
But I'm thinking, what about those times when we need to, like, decrease a behavior?
Yeah.
The book also talks about punishment and extinction, and I think those are topics that people often, like, misunderstand.
Yeah, you're right. They can be kind of tricky. Let's start with punishment, I guess.
Okay.
In everyday talk, punishment usually means something like harsh or bad, right?
Right.
But in ABA, it has a very specific meaning.
Right.
It just means any consequence that makes a behavior less likely to happen again.
Oh, okay. So it's not about being mean or anything like that?
No. It's really just about reducing a behavior.
Got it.
And just like reinforcement, there are two types of punishment, positive and negative.
Right. And those terms, again, they're about adding or removing something to the situation, right?
Exactly. So positive punishment means adding something unpleasant to decrease the behavior, like a kid getting a timeout for hitting their sibling. The timeout, that's the added consequence, and the goal is to reduce the hitting.
Okay, so then negative punishment would be taking away something enjoyable to decrease a behavior.
Right. Say a teenager loses their video game privileges for not doing their chores. That's taking away something they like to make them less likely to skip chores next time.
Got it. So again, it all comes back to understanding what that consequence is doing and how it affects whether the behavior will happen again or not.
Yeah, exactly.
But I imagine, like, there are ethical things to consider when using punishment.
Oh, absolutely. People who practice ABA, they always try to use reinforcement first.
Right.
Punishment is only used like when other things haven't worked.
Okay.
And there are very clear rules for when and how to use it ethically. It's about finding the most effective and kind approach to changing behavior.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of reducing behaviors, the book also mentions extinction, which kind of makes me think of, like, dinosaurs going extinct.
Well, it does involve a behavior kind of disappearing. In ABA, extinction means you stop giving reinforcement for a behavior that used to get reinforcement, and that leads to the behavior happening less over time.
Oh, okay. So, like, if I used to give my dog a treat every time they sat on command, but then I stopped giving treats, they'd probably stop sitting on command because they're not getting that reward anymore.
Exactly. Your dog learns that sitting doesn't get them that treat, so the behavior gradually fades away.
But I guess it's not always that simple, is it?
Well, you're right. Sometimes there's what we call an extinction burst.
Okay.
That's where the behavior actually increases before it starts to decrease.
Oh, interesting.
Like in your example, your dog might try even harder to get the treat, even though it's not coming.
So you got to be really consistent and stick with the extinction, even if it gets a little messy at first.
Yeah, if you give in during that burst, it'll just confuse your dog and probably make things worse in the long run.
Right. So consistency is key when you're dealing with extinction. And it's fascinating how these ideas of reinforcement, punishment, and extinction, they can help us understand, like, complicated social interactions, not just simple stuff like a dog sitting.
Yeah, for sure.
How do we see these principles playing out in, like, our everyday relationships?
Well, think about a kid who throws tantrums to get attention from their parents.
Yeah.
If the parents give in, even if it's just by, like, scolding or yelling, they're kind of reinforcing those tantrums.
Right, because the kid's still getting attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The kid learns that tantrums are a way to get their parents to notice them.
So even negative attention can be reinforcing, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it really shows how important it is to understand why someone is behaving the way they are. What purpose is it serving? Once you get that, you can come up with better ways to help them change their behavior.
It's like we're putting together this giant puzzle,
Yeah.
and all these concepts we're talking about are the pieces that help us see the whole picture. But we're just getting started. There's still so much more to explore with ABA.
There is, and it just gets more and more interesting.
We've covered a lot of ground, like how reinforcement and punishment can shape behavior and how extinction can, make those behaviors fade away. But I'm curious, how do we actually build new behaviors?
Yeah.
Especially those really complex ones. There's a section in the book on shaping that caught my eye. It makes me think of like sculpting with clay.
That's a great way to think about it. Shaping in ABA is basically about gradually creating a behavior by reinforcing all those little steps along the way.
Okay.
We don't expect, perfection right off the bat.
Right. So instead of waiting for someone to do the whole behavior perfectly,
Yeah.
we break it down and reinforce those smaller steps.
Exactly. Think about teaching a kid how to tie their shoes. That's a lot of steps, right?
Yeah.
With shaping, you might start by just, reinforcing any attempt to touch the laces, then
Okay.
reinforce crossing the laces,
Yeah.
making a loop, and so on.
So each step kind of builds on the one before it.
Right, like building a staircase one step at a time until you get to the top.
I like that. That's a really smart way to teach those complicated skills.
It is. It makes them seem less scary and more doable.
Totally. So what are some other real-life examples of shaping?
Oh, shaping is super versatile. We
Right.
use it for animal training, teaching social skills, even helping people recover after a stroke.
Wow.
It's a really powerful tool for helping people change their behavior in all sorts of situations.
This is making me realize how much ABA can really help people grow and develop in so many different ways. It's not just about dealing with problem behaviors. It's about helping people become the best they can be.
You got it. In the book, it highlights another really key concept for understanding behavior change, generalization.
Okay, I'm noticing a pattern here.
Yeah.
We're taking these words, learning, teaching, shaping, generalization, that seems simple at first,
Mhm.
and giving them this whole new meaning within ABA. So what's generalization all about?
Generalization is when a behavior that's been learned starts to happen in other environments, other situations besides where it was originally learned. It's like taking what you've practiced and using it in a real game.
Okay, so like if a kid learns to say please and thank you at home,
Right.
we want them to use those manners at school, at the store, basically everywhere they go.
Exactly. We don't want behaviors to just stay in one place or with certain people. We want them to be flexible, adaptable, something they can actually use in real life.
Makes sense. So how do we encourage generalization in ABA?
There are a few different strategies. We can change up the training environment, teach lots of examples of the behavior, and reinforce generalization whenever it happens naturally. It's about making the learning really relevant to the person's life.
So it's about giving people the skills they need and then showing them how to use those skills in different situations so they can be successful.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that ABA is always changing, always growing
Yeah.
with new research and applications all the time.
It feels like this deep dive has opened up this whole new world of understanding for me. I bet our listeners are feeling the same way.
I hope so, because ABA, at its core, is about understanding ourselves and each other better. It's about using science to help people live happier, more fulfilling lives.
That's a great way to put it. We've only just scratched the surface, but I think we've built a really strong base for learning more and exploring further.
Definitely. And that's what it's all about. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and keep learning. There's always more to discover.
Well said. And to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep diving into this fascinating world of ABA.
There are tons of resources out there,
Wow.
and we'll share some links in the show notes.
Until next time, keep those minds engaged and stay curious. And remember, the power to change behavior and really change lives, it's inside all of us.